Good morning, sir.
Good morning, all of you.
Morning, sir.
Good morning,
Good morning, sir.
good morning. Now, paper two, right? Paper, or what is this? Paper two, yeah. Paper two, then we are dealing with Dryden's essay, right? Well, now the essay on dramatic poetry or poesy or poetry both mean the same. And we discussed the context in which this essay was written. Okay? And uh, it's a kind of a defense. Defense here is a kind of an explanation, uh, right? An apology. An apology is something that in literature, or when you say apology, it doesn't mean uh, you are feeling sorry for something. That's the general meaning of the word apology. But here, the word apology is used as an explanation or a defense or a justification. Right? Now this essay that Dryden wrote, Dryden is a neoclassical writer. He's also, he wrote during the Restoration period, and poet, essayist, dramatist, critic. This essay is structured in the form of a dialogue. We already discussed that, right? A dialogue in the form of an exchange between imagined characters based on the earlier models of dialogues which you find in Socrates and Platonic dialogues. Now, the immediate context in which this essay happens or framed is the victory of the British over the Dutch. And now, Critus, who is one of the conversants, he talks about this condition of contemporary poetry in England, and the discussion moves to bad poetry. And the contemporary poets are seen against the achievements of the ancient poets. So, it's a kind of a debate between the virtues of modern and ancient writers. This ancient and modern controversy is something that always was there. And I also refer to Jonathan Swift's book called Battle of Books, wherein this clash between the ancient and modern writers is presented. Are we clear till here? Okay? Somebody can unmute and say yes or no.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir.
Okay. Now, when we say neoclassical definitions or concepts of literature, now neoclassicism is all about, going back to the classical writers of Greece and Rome, that is Latin and Greek masters like Homer, Aristophanes, Sophocles, Euripides, Virgil, Theocritus. These are all Greek and Roman writers. So these ancient writers, it was believed by the neoclassicists. What does the word neo mean? Neo means new. Now these neoclassicists, right, they looked towards the ancients for models whether you are writing an elegy or a pastoral poem, or you are writing a lyric or an epic or a drama, a tragedy or a comedy. They believe that the models to be followed but to be found in the ancient writers. Then the question of comparing the relative excellences of the modern writers vis-a-vis the ancient writers comes up. Since poetry is too large a domain, they decide to narrow down the focus and talk about dramatic poetry, wherein Lycidius is given the opportunity to define what drama is. Now, how does Lycidius define drama? He says it's a just and lively image of human nature. So what should drama be? Dramatic poetry. What should drama be? There are many qualifications here. You may note it down. First is it should be just, meaning it should be true. It should be truthful. And a lively image of human nature. So what does drama represent? First is it should be truthful. Second, it should be lively. What do you mean by lively? It's a lively image of human nature. It must be.
It should depict the exact figure of what it is actually, and it should be very much enthusiastic and interesting for the audience also to listen or see.
Yeah, right. It must be interesting. All art is aimed at pleasing, isn't it? So it must be a lively and justified image of human nature. And what does it do? Please, please, I want you to focus on this so that you will understand what Lycidius' definition of drama is. Next is, it must represent passions and humors. I already referred to passion. Passions are feelings, okay? Human feelings, strong feelings, and also humors. Humor can be translated as personality. Humor can be translated as personality. And what do you mean by the word humors? I refer to the medieval and also, during this particular time, the understanding of human physiology was in terms of different fluids which are in the body, like choler, phlegm, bile, all these. Now the mixture of these fluids or humors determines the kind of person that one happens to be, and the changes of fortune to which it is subject for the delight and instruction of mankind. Now this is the definition. It must delight, it must instruct. So there are twin functions of literature or twin functions of dramatic poetry. What are those twin functions? Twin function means two functions. What are the two functions? Quickly, somebody.
It should be true, and then it should be lively, and next thing is it should represent passion and humor.
Okay. Now what is the function? Okay. These are all the qualities, right? So what should it do? Two functions. The last line he says, what are the two functions of drama? It must, of course, delight.
Yeah, it should have the empathy feeling. It should have a good coordination, cooperation, and good communication skills. Little bit fun, and the confidence that emerges out of the characters should also be very much proper.
Excuse me, who is this? Is it Iqbal Yasmin? I can see a name. Is that your name?
Sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, Miss Yasmin, what you are saying is about the general, features of drama. Now here, Dryden very specific. All that is true, but what specifically, Dryden points out is two functions. Quickly, you can note it down. One is, he says, for the delight and instruction. Two functions. It should delight and it should also instruct, meaning there is a moral, educative purpose. Am I clear? Okay. Now, Christ here begins to talk about the merits of the ancients. Okay. Now, herein he says that all that the modern writers are, writing about actually was already completed by the ancient writers. And so, who is the first to speak in this essay? There are 4 people. What are their names? Can you quickly tell me? Anyone? Quickly tell me the names of the people who are debating, discussing. There are 4 people. Who are they? Anyone?
Sir, is it Plato?
No, not Plato. At the beginning of the class,
Yeah, it is given in the reader, sir, that it is Eugenius,
Eugenius.
Lord Buckburst.
No, just a second. Don't go into the details of those people. It's not necessary. You can just remember their given names. One is
Okay.
Eugenius, right?
Crites, Lycidius,
Lepsidius, Neander. Christ, Eugenius, Christ, Eugenius, Lepsidius, and Neander. Now, Christ speaks for the ancients. Eugenius speaks for the moderns. Lepsidius speaks for the French, and Neander is a kind of a, uh, is a kind of a moderator. He moderates the discussion and talks about the relative merits of the, English writers opposed to the French and also the ancient writers. This much you need to remember now. Got the idea? So the first person to speak is Christ. Whom is he defending? He is defending the ancients. Okay? Now he says that when the ancients have excelled in everything, they have invented, they have devised the formulas, they have devised the rules that are followed by the modern writers. And he talks about the unities of time, place, and action. Okay? Now, what is the excellence of these ancient writers? The ancient writers, he says, well, were faithful imitators and wise observers of that nature. Now see, quickly note down this. The neoclassicists believe that art or literature is a mirror or a reflection of human nature, of general human nature, not particular human nature, but general human nature. So in that sense, the ancients have already excelled. And Christ says something very, very devastating. He says, we have added nothing of our own except we have the confidence to say our which is better. Okay? Now, so for the moderns have only been imitating the ancients, and the moderns have not added anything to the already established work of the ancient writers. And he lists out 2 important works that the modern writers have derived from. One is Aristotle's Poetics. Can you write it down? Aristotle's Poetics. And second is Horace Horace is a Latin writer. Aristotle is a Greek writer. Horace, the art of poetry. The art of poetry. Ars Poetica. Okay? That is. So, well, now then he goes on to talk about how the ancient writers have devised the three unities of time, place, and action. I will not go into these details because I already completed these three: unity of time, place, and action. Are you clear about time, place, and action? The unities.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so you can read it. You can. I already talked about it. Unity of time, place, and action. So now then, well, he says now the ancient writers like Aristophanes and Plautus and Euripides and Sophocles. Okay, he says, can never see one of these plays which are now written, but it increases my admiration of the ancient. Meaning, when you see the achievements of the ancient writers, whether it is comedy like that of Aristophanes and Plautus. Now, Aristophanes is a Greek comedy writer, writer of comedies, and Plautus is a Roman writer of comedies, and Sophocles is a Greek writer of tragedies, and Euripides also a Greek writer of tragedies. Dear friends, don't get confused. The ancient writers, whether they wrote tragedies or comedies like Sophocles and Euripides or Plautus and Aristophanes, Christ says, when I see the modern writers, I'm left with only a feeling of more admiration for the ancient writers because they have written so excellently. Right? Now, among the modern writers, says Christ, he finds Ben Jonson as the only writer who follows the classical models very, 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 very vividly. Okay? Now, then he says that he calls him Father Ben. Okay? Now, he says, and whether you consider the bad plays of our age or regard the good plays of the last, both the best and worst of the modern poets will equally instruct you to admire the ancients. All put together, Christ's argument states that the ancient writers remain the excellent writers. Are we clear about Christ's arguments? Christ is defending who here? I need a response from you, otherwise I can continue without any feedback from you. Whom is he defending? Excuse me, somebody.
Modern writers.
No. See, that's why you have to if you have a pen and paper or if you are taking notes, please quickly put it down like this. Christ defends the ancients. Eugenius defends the moderns. Lasidius defends the French. Neander, who is Dryden himself, is a kind of a moderator. It's a simple plan. It's a simple structure. Of course, I assume that you will remember this, will you? Right. Second person to speak is Eugenius. Now, Eugenius talks about the modern writers. And moderns have, excelled in the imitation of nature. Okay? And this is something very important. First point that he says is the modern writers look to nature for their models. and not blindly imitate or follow the ancient writers. This is the first point, right? Now, second, he says, now it's my duty to show to you the faults of the ancient writers. Now, the first thing that he points out is that, you know, the ancient writers did not divide their dramatic performances into acts. This is first thing. Will you remember this? In terms of the plot structure, the modern writers have excelled over the ancient writers. First thing that they introduced is the first acts. Okay. Now the act was not there in the ancient writers, and the division between the acts was, you know, was indicated by the singing of the chorus. So the chorus functioned as a kind of a transition device, whereas the modern writers have added the division of acts. This is the first thing that you need to remember. Then, the ancient writers had, you know, simple plots. The ancient writers have simple plots, and you know, their action was limited, whereas the modern writers have introduced multiple plots, subplots. So there is a story, there is a plot, and parallel to that, there is another story taking place. Are you able to understand this? Okay?
Sir, is this everything only about the comparison between the ancient writers and the modern writers, sir?
Which one?
Now, whatever you are saying, it is only about the comparison between the ancient writers and the modern writers, sir.
What I am saying is what the essay is all about. The essay has a structure, Yasmin. Okay? The
Yes,
essay
sir.
has a structure. The structure is first, okay, Lycidius gives the definition of drama. Second, Christ defends the ancients. Third, Eugenius is defending the modern writers against the ancient writers. Next comes Lycidius, who talks about the French writers. Are you able to follow the pattern here?
Yes, sir. Once again, please tell no, sir. The pattern, please.
The pattern is, the first is, you know, they discuss the state of contemporary poetry. Second, then comes the opposition between the ancients and the moderns. They want to compare the merits and demerits of ancient and modern writers. Third, Lycidius is given the opportunity to define dramatic poetry, that he defines what is drama. So the comparison is not general, but the comparison is specific to dramatic poetry. Writes, talks about the merits of the ancient writers. Okay? Yeah. Good. Who is this? Rameshwari. Yeah, good, Rameshwari. Yeah, there. Christ talks about the ancients, then Eugenius is responding to, it's a dialogue, right? So Eugenius, it's very simple, don't get confused. Eugenius is responding to the, you know, to the statements made by Christ about ancient writers. So Eugenius is defending the modern writers, what are their excellences, and what are the faults of the ancient writers. Then comes Lycidius, who talks about the French writers. Okay. Then comes Neander, who talks about contemporary poets and also the state of British drama. Okay. And then they sum up. This is the structure, plain and simple. Shall I continue? Okay. The plots. The second point that Eugenius is saying, that the plots that the classical writers were dealing with were very simple plots. There was not much variety, whereas the modern writers have introduced a lot of variety into their plots. Okay? Right. Now, unless you have something to say, please switch off your microphones. Okay? Now, well, then, yet in the meantime, we are not to conclude anything rashly against those great men, but preserve them the dignity of masters and give that honor to their memories. Okay? Now, Christ, though, you know, Eugenius, though accepting that the ancient writers lacked certain advantages, he concludes his, response by saying that, the ancients are really, they have excelled in many things, and let us not forget that the ancient let us not forget that the ancient writers have their own merits. Okay? Now, then Lascivious, okay, enters, saying that now the English writers or the modern English writers would have been great if we are talking about the 17th century writers or the 16th century writers soon after Shakespeare, like Beaumont and Fletcher. But he says that after Shakespeare, after Ben Jonson, after Beaumont and Fletcher, there has not been any great dramatist in Britain, in English literature. And he says that here the French playwrights have excelled. Now, the French have faithfully followed the rules of the ancients. Now, are you able to see the arguments? The ancients have established the rules. Christ defends the ancients. Eugenius says, yes, they did establish the rules and they did write better, they did write great plays, but the moderns have improved upon them. The moderns have contributed immensely to the development of drama by introducing multiple plots, by introducing, the division of acts, the action being divided into acts. So there is variety in modern drama. And Lascivious joins in and says that when you talk about the following of the rules of the ancients, it is the French who are faithful rather than the British. Now he says that the French follow the rules very meticulously, and they follow the plots structure that was introduced by the ancients, and they don't, burden themselves with subplots, and they observe the unities. And herein comes Lascivious' attack on tragic comedy. Can you write it down? Tragic comedy. Meaning the British or the English writers have introduced a new kind of drama called tragic comedy, wherein tragic and the comic elements are mixed. Some of the very harsh critics have called it the mongrel drama. Mongrel, meaning it's mixed hybrid. Are you able to understand? Are we clear till here? So what is Lascivious' chart? Lascivious says that the French follow the rules meticulously, carefully. The French follow the three rules: classical unity, the time, place, and action. The French do not burden themselves with underplots and subplots. Then the French don't mix comedy and tragedy. They maintain the purity of tragedy and comedy. Whereas the British have given rise to a mongrel drama called tragic comedy. Okay? He says there is no theatre in the world, okay, has anything so absurd as the English tragic comedy. Okay? Now, this is Aristotle defines tragedy and comedy, but there is no mention of the mixing of tragedy and comedy. Okay? Now, and even Shakespeare says Lycidius has not been faithful in his historical plays. He was, in his chronicle plays, he was not very faithful, and then he says that the English bother too much with plot, P-L-O-T, too much plot, okay, and the the British drama also, presented violence on the stage. When he talks about how death was represented on the stage, there was violence. Now, if you remember that in the dramatic representation of the ancient writers like Sophocles, Euripides, Aeschylus, death was reported. Death was never shown on the stage. But Lycidius says, well, the British writers have been presenting violence on the stage, which is a violation of the classical models. And he says that the plays of Corneille and Racine, these are the two French writers, Corneille, C-O-R-N-E-I-L, and Racine, R-A-C-I-N-E. These have produced great plays. Well, then now Lycidius concluded in this manner, and Neander, after a little pause, thus answered. Then comes the question of defending the contemporary British playwrights. Now he says that, now this is the argument of Neander. Neander is none other than the new man, or John Dryden himself. Now he says that, that I am of opinion that neither our faults nor their virtues are considerable enough to place them above us. First, he rubbishes Lycidius' claim that the French have written better plays than the British. He says, despite our faults, or despite their adhering to their, classical rules, it cannot be said that the French have written better plays than the British. Okay. Well, now he says that the French were very, very academic in their imitation of the ancient writers. The French did follow the rules of the ancient writers, but the French did not have the spirit. They were mechanical. He asks Corneille himself, their arch poet, what has he produced except the lyre? Okay? There is nothing in the French drama which can compare to the plays of Shakespeare or Beaumont Fletcher and Ben Jonson. Now, even their plays which they claim to be excellent, that of Molière, M-O-L-I-E-R-E, Molière. Now the French playwrights, the great French playwrights are, one is, Corneille, second Racine, third, what is the third name I just mentioned? Are you listening?
Cornell.
Molière, Corneille, Racine and Molière, M-O-L-I-E-R-E. Okay? Now, they have mixed their serious plays with mirth, like our tragic comedy since the death of Cardinal Richelieu. Okay, so now, then he defends the mixing of tragedy and comedy. Okay, and how does Dryden defend the mixing of comedy and tragedy? He says, does not our eye pass from the pleasant things to the unpleasant things? The same defense even Dr. Johnson also makes, that life is a mixture of of what? The good and the bad. Do you agree with me or not?
Yes, sir.
Is life all tragedy? Or is life all comedy? Comedy in the sense not laughter, but is life all pleasant? Is life all pleasant? Are Baba, only one has the answer. Okay, I take it as yes from all of you. That there is a mixture. Farhad, please turn off your video. Turn off your camera, please. Farhad Sultana, somebody's, yeah. You can switch off your camera. Well, because the only thing is, I have my presentation here. Yeah, thank you. Now, well, Dryden says the eye passes from pleasant to unpleasantness. Okay, and then, okay, the old rule of logic might have convinced him that contraries when placed near set off each other. Okay. Now, when opposites are placed together, one enhances the other. When joy and mirth are mixed, when the tragic and the comic are put together, then one enhances the other. One, sets off the other. Okay. And the comedy in tragedy, that is in the tragic comedy, the mixture of tragedy and comedy, it produces a, what should I say, a balanced kind of, response. Okay, it has an effect on the mind. Well, now, and then he goes on to say that the British plays have plays which are, again, he goes back to what Eugenius has said about moderns having many plots. So he says that, the British have produced plays with greater complexity. And he gives the example of astronomy, okay, of the planets and all that. Now, well, and another thing is, apart from the plots, mixing of tragedy and comedy, there is tragic comedy, and then more complex plots rather than the simple plots. He says another dimension of British plays is that their plays have more characters. Are you able to understand? Okay. There is a lot of variety in terms of characterization. You have more number of characters in British drama. So it says Neander. And, well, the more the merrier, okay, don't we say? Has anyone come across this expression? The more the merrier. Don't we say that? Of course, too many also spoil, that's a different thing, but the more the merrier. So the more characters, there is more variety. The more plots, the more variety. Making the action, the dramatic action, more lively and also just representative. It is representative of the life that goes around us. Now, to conclude on this subject of relations, if we are to be blamed for showing too much of the action, the French are as faulty for discovering too little. A mean betwixt both should be observed by every judicious writer. Now, Neander here is doing what is called the balancing act. The balancing act. He says too much of variety, too little of variety. Too much of complexity, too little of complexity. Both these extremes have to be avoided, and there should be a median, there should be a median way of doing things. This is, Eugenius. And he says that, the unities of time and place, okay, does reflect a kind of a lack of imagination. it restricts the imagination of the writer. How? If action has to be confined only to one place, and if the time that is represented is very limited to 24 hours, then it puts restrictions on the free exercise of imagination. So he says that the French writers, in their eagerness to imitate the classical writers or the ancient writers, have in fact sacrificed their imagination. In fact, sacrificed their imagination. And then he comes to Shakespeare. Okay. Now there is nothing like Shakespeare in contemporary drama, in French drama. Now Shakespeare, okay, he says that, well, I dare boldly affirm these two things of the English drama. First, that we have many plays of ours as regular as any of theirs, and which besides have more variety of plot and character. And secondly, that in most of the irregular plays of Shakespeare or Fletcher, there is more masculine fancy and greater spirit in the writings than there is any of French. Now, he says that now Shakespeare is a great writer, a complex writer, and no one in French drama can equal the vivacity or the energy of Shakespeare. Then he says that Neander says, to prove that even the British writers have followed the classical unities or the rules of the ancients, he says that I will examine Ben Jonson's The Silent Woman. Okay. Now, and then he says that Shakespeare was the man who, of all modern and perhaps ancient writers, had the largest and most comprehensive scope. Dryden places Shakespeare on par with Sophocles, Euripides, Aeschylus. He says, of all ancient and modern writers put together, Shakespeare had the most comprehensive soul. Can anyone explain what the comprehensive means here? Quickly.
Comprehensive means understandable, sir.
Understandable. Comprehension, that is. You are talking about comprehension. To comprehend is a verb, okay? Comprehension is a noun. Now, comprehensive is an adjective, right? Comprehensive means covering many things, or able to a total. Comprehensive means a totality. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
It's a very comprehensive book, meaning what? It is a book that covers almost all aspects, not just one aspect. Okay, so it's a very unique. Your answer needs to be comprehensive, meaning what is that? Means your answer must cover all the aspects of the subject that you are dealing with.
Yes, sir.
Okay, got it?
Yes.
In that sense, Shakespeare was the most comprehensive imagination because he could invent so many characters. He could talk about murder. He could talk about unfaithfulness. He could talk about friendship, love. He could create laughter. He could create villainy, jealousy. So Shakespeare covered all the feelings that human beings are subject to. Take the case of Hamlet or Macbeth or Othello. Othello is filled with suspicion and jealousy and kills his wife. Okay, Desdemona. Macbeth, Lear, King Lear, an old father king, distributes his kingdom among his three daughters. And he suffers. So friendship, love, jealousy, ambition in Macbeth, suspicion, all these aspects of human nature are covered by Shakespeare. That's why Dryden says Shakespeare had the most comprehensive soul. And he did not imitate the ancients. What did he imitate? He imitated nature. Shakespeare imitated who? Did he imitate Aristophanes or Sophocles or Euripides? Dear friends, whom did he imitate? Nature. He imitated nature. Okay. Then he talks about Beaumont and Fletcher's achievements, and then focus on Ben Jonson. And Ben Jonson, he says, was the most perfect, okay, of the playwrights. He invades authors like a monarch, and what would be theft in other poets is only victory. The point here is that Ben Jonson, okay, borrowed from many other writers, but he did not, follow them slavishly, but he used his own imagination. We are coming to the end of the essay, okay. Well, now he says, I would compare him with Shakespeare. I must acknowledge him the more correct poet. But Shakespeare, the greater wit. Shakespeare was the Homer or father of our dramatic poets. Jonson was the Virgil, the pattern of elaborate writing. Now, see, Dryden says, Ben Jonson was a correct poet. Ben Jonson wrote more correct plays, correct in the sense he followed all the classical rules. But he says, between Shakespeare and Jonson, Ben Jonson wrote more correct plays, but Shakespeare was a greater wit. Shakespeare wrote plays with great wit. He compares Shakespeare to Homer, the greatest of Greek poets, and compares Jonson to Virgil, the greatest of the Roman poets. But when comparing Homer and Virgil, Virgil is on a different level, a lower level, when compared to Homer, who is on a higher pedestal. So quick response, please. Whom did Dryden compare Shakespeare to?
Johnson.
No.
Ben Jonson.
No. Shakespeare is compared to Homer. Shakespeare is compared to Homer. And Ben Jonson is compared to Virgil. 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 It is toward the end of the text. Okay? Well. Right. Now, he says, these are the very famous lines in this essay. I admire him. I admire Ben Jonson. But I love Shakespeare. What is the difference, friends? He says, Dryden says, I admire Ben Jonson, but I love Shakespeare. What does it mean?
That is, he gets attracted towards the writings of John, but truly speaking, he loves Shakespeare.
When you love somebody, okay, and when you like somebody, these are two different things, okay, two different things. So Ben Jonson might have written correct plays. I admire him, but I am in love with Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare's writing. This is the response. So this is what you need to be focusing on in the examination. The examine of the silent woman. Now Dryden wrote a play called The Silent Woman, but that is not a part of your syllabus. It's only till examine of the silent woman. Now, towards the end of the essay, as Neander keeps continuing about, the different aspects of, British poetry, okay, and by then, the boat the barge that they are traveling on reaches the steps, okay, and okay. Uh, can anyone read this for me quickly, because I'll sum it up.
Neander steps into support in drama precisely because of its slap pots, mixture of mirth and tragedy in tragic comedy, and spirited multiple characters, drawing on Platonic dialogues for
Platonic,
inspiration.
platonic.
Platonic dialogues for inspiration, Dryden's characters present their opinions with eloquence and sound reasoning. They discuss playwrights such as Ben Jonson, Molière,
Corneille, Corneille
and
and
Shakespeare, Corneille and Shakespeare with great insight, and has a final debate over the suitability of rhyme to drama. Crites objects to the use of rhyme because he believes it detracts from the verisimilitude.
verisimilitude. Verisimilitude means
Very
truthfulness. Okay,
okay.
go
of
ahead.
the scene, of the scene and Crites Aristocratle. Uh,
Cite Aristotle.
Aristotle. Neander suggests a natural rhyme to serve the play's meaning can add to its artistry. During this final speech, the barge docks at the Somerset Stairs and the four friends go their separate ways, content with their evening.
Thank you. Now see, they discuss, now in the course of this essay on dramatic poetry, now there is discussion of Ben Jonson, Moliere, Racine, Corneille and Shakespeare. Towards the end of the essay, now after Dryden engages with Ben Jonson's The Silent Woman, he talks about the use of rhyme in drama, suitability of rhyme. Crites objects to the rhyme because it looks artificial and it takes away our attention from truthfulness. Verisimilitude means truthfulness. And he quotes the authority of Aristotle. Now please remember these names: Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, okay, Aristophanes, Euripides, Aeschylus. Okay, so don't get pronunciation. Okay, so Aristotle, don't worry about it. So then, while Neander is continuing with his defense or discourse on poetry, the barge, comes nearer to their, destination. There is Somerset Stairs. Where are they? On what river are they? Is there barge? Can anyone tell me? Where are they? Where the discussion takes place? Where does the discussion take place? Where does it take place? Anyone here? Where are these four friends discussing? Are they sitting in a room? River Thames. Good. Rameshwari. Yeah. Charan, Gokul at the riverside, not in the riverside. They are on the river. Okay. They are on a barge. And the barge reaches Somerset Stairs, and then they go their separate ways. So this, dear friends, is the essay on dramatic poetry. Okay. Now quickly, don't worry about, now you just follow your whatever material that you have, and also I gave you a link to poetryfoundation.org in my last class, so you can read the text also. There are any number of aids available for you. Okay, and yeah, so follow the argument: ancients, moderns, debate, neoclassicism, the context of the essay, that is the recent victory of the British over the Dutch. The four friends are on a barge on River Thames, and they enter into a conversation about poets celebrating the victory of the British, and now we will be victims of bad poetry. This gives the occasion for tribes to talk about the ancient poetry, ancient writers, who are better than any other uh, subsequent writers, to which Eugenius uh, opposes and then talks about modern writers. Then Lascelles talks about the French writers. Neander talks about the contemporary British writers, comparing them both to the French and also the ancient writers, and goes on to examine The Silent Woman by Ben Jonson and discuss the rhyme in poetry, in drama. And finally, the barge reaches the Somerset Stairs and the friends all depart. This is the structure of it. Neander talks about what? Neander talks about the contemporary playwrights, the British playwrights, Shakespeare, Beaumont, Fletcher, Ben Jonson, and also compares them to the French writers like Corneille, Racine, Molière, okay, and then also compares them to the ancient writers like Homer, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides. Okay. This is the structure of the essay. Don't need to worry. Dear friends, let me tell you one thing. Whenever you read something, try to note down the points, not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 points kind of thing. But note making means what is the main idea. Under that, you put a Roman numeral 1, and under that, put A, B, C, or A, and again further, what are the main ideas under A? Could be number 1, 2, 3, 4. Then go to the second numeral, third, and fourth. This is how you take notes, not 100 points. Note making is Somerset Stairs. On the river Thames, there is a phrase Somerset. Okay, so Somerset Stairs which lead you out of the river. Okay. Well, yeah. So that's it, and then I will quickly go on to another essay by Philip Sidney. I'll present it. Just a second. Well, can you see that? Can you? An apology for poetry. Oh, just a second. Yeah, now I want an answer. Can you see this presentation? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, an apology for poetry, sometimes also called defense of poetry. Okay. So I will again reiterate, I will again repeat this. Apology does not mean saying sorry. Apology means defense. Apology means you are arguing about something. An apology for poetry means you are defending or arguing in favor of poetry. Am I clear?
Yes, sir. Sir, defense here, the spelling is written as DEFENSE. So generally it is CE, no? So is it because of some part of speech that the spelling has changed?
See, it depends. Two things. One is when you are defending something, both as a noun, in terms of noun and in terms of a verb. Okay, like produce and produce. Okay? Have I made myself clear? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, defense is a noun. Okay. And then it's a defense. C would be the verb form. Okay. I think that makes it clear. Well, now written in 1580 and but published posthumously, that is in 1598, sorry, 1595, Sir Philip Sidney. Now, do you know who is called as Sir? Why is somebody called Sir?
It is a sense of respect that we give someone, sir.
So, like just like you call your teacher Sir, okay, or generally, you know, in summer, in when you go to another place, or you call everybody Sir and Ma'am. In you know, in American context, mostly in the South, you say yes ma'am, yes sir, okay, no ma'am. So it is a title. Sir is a title. It is also called knighthood. Will you remember this? It's called knighthood. Sir is a title given by the monarch of Britain, that is either the king or the queen, gives the title Sir to anyone who has contributed in any field. Could be medicine, could be arts, could be philanthropy, could be any area of human activity. If somebody has contributed in recognition of somebody's greatness, the title Sir is given. Are you able to understand? In that sense,
Yes, sir.
you
Even
say,
in India, also, Sir C.V. Raman is there.
yes, Sir C.V. Raman. It's a title given by the
Yes.
king. Okay, Sir C.V. Raman, Sir J.C. Bose. Okay, Sir Donald Bradman, Sir Anthony Hopkins, the actor. Okay, Sir uh, Sir Syed Ahmed. Okay, Aligarh Muslim University. Syed Ahmed. Manikar, please. Yeah, I think yeah. Now you got the idea of who Sir is. Sir Akbar Hydari. Okay, who was the one of the first vice chancellors of Usmania University. So the word Sir is not respect, but it is a title. So here, Sir Philip Sidney is the title given by the Queen to Sidney. Well, now the context of you know, the essay is you know, Sidney was, you know, Sidney thought about responding to a book written by Stephen Gosson. Stephen Gosson was a writer, essay writer. Okay, he was also you know, a pamphleteer, a man of letters, who wrote The School of Abuse. Now, School of Abuse containing a pleasant invective against poets, pipers, players, jesters, and such like caterpillars of the Commonwealth. This was written in 1579. So first thing is, you must remember, Sidney's defense of poetry is not a direct response, but is a kind of a, what should I say, defense of poetry in general in the context of the attacks made by Puritans, context of the attacks made by many people against poetry, against art. The immediate context is Stephen Gosson mischievously dedicated his pamphlet called School of Abuse, which was published in 1579, and it was dedicated to Philip Sidney. Imagine somebody writes against poetry and dedicates it to a poet. How will that be? It looks so, weird, right? Yes or no? You write something against teachers and then dedicate it to your teacher. Something like that. Are you able to understand this? Philip Sidney he was not taken into confidence, and Stephen Gosson wrote an invective against poets, okay, and they are like caterpillars of the Commonwealth, meaning they are like like parasites, for which Sidney thought about writing a defense of poetry in general. So this is the immediate context. Okay, can you now? This is now Philip Sidney's response was not immediately to the school of abuse, but it was he had it in mind when he wrote it. Okay. Now the word Philip comes from the word Philippos, meaning lover of horse. The word Philip means philia in Greek is love, hippos is horse. Like that's why you say hippopotamus, meaning what a horse. What's the name? You call it a hippopotamus because otherwise the word hippo, okay, means horse. Well, so Sidney's apology for poetry or defense of poetry is written in the form of a 7-part structure. Will you quickly make note of this? It is not there anywhere, so it will help you to understand the essay. It has 7 parts. It is a form of a classical oration. It is a form of classical oration. Now, these 7 parts, can anyone read these 7 parts, please, quickly for me?
He forms his argument in a classical 7-part structure oration, beginning with an introduction and moving through the stages of proposition,
Excuse me, just a
division.
hello. Is it
Yes.
Shailaja here? I see the name. Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, Ms. Shailaja, can you please go slow so that others also can register them? Okay? That 7.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
He forms his argument in a classical 7-part structure oration, beginning with an introduction and moving through the stages of proposition, division, examination, refutation, final, peroration,
Peroration,
and including as custom permitted a digression,
digressio,
digression on a related issue. Here, the state of poetry in England. In the defense of poesy, he references classical text and examines different forms of poetry.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, what are the 7 parts? First is the introduction, proposition, division, examination, refutation, peroration, and there is a digressio. Are you able to understand? Okay. Now, he begins the essay with a reference to, the horsemanship of Johann Pietro Pugliano. Is that in your reader, Pugliano? He begins with an introduction. He begins with a small anecdote. It's always good to begin with a story, right? Okay. So introduce the subject by talking about something that has happened in your own experience. So he talks about, you know, uh, how when they were in Italy, okay. Now, you know, they meet the horseman, head of the in charge of the horses, okay, the stables, Pugliano. Now, Pugliano talks so greatly about the horses that you know uh, Pugliano says that horses are so exquisite animals, and there is nothing greater than a cavalry in army and all. So what Sydney is doing here is just like Pugliano, because he is a horseman, because he is an equestrian, because he is into horses, deals with horses, known for his horsemanship. He praises the horses and horsemen because he's familiar with them. Similarly, he says, I was prompted to talk about poetry. Why? Because he himself is a poet. Is the analogy clear to you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Just like Pugliano talks about the horsemanship, the excellences of horses and horsemanship. He is induced, Sydney is induced to talk about, poetry. Now, how does he begins with, okay? Now, these are the, can you quickly note down and somebody can read it, read this slide for me?
Sydney's Defense and Stephen Gosson's School of Abuse dedicated to Sydney.
In Annie.
School of Abuse containing a pleasant invective against poets, pipers, flyers, jesters, and such like caterpillars of the Commonwealth. Sydney's apology for poetry, Sydney's view of antiquity and universality of poetry, Sydney's definition of poetry, poetry as superior to history and philosophy, the various kinds of poetry, four chief objections to poetry, Sydney's review of English poetry and drama, view of poetry.
Good, thank you. This is the scheme of the defense. These are the main points. If you are interested in main points, what are the main points of the defense? These are the main points that he talks about. First is, he talks about view of antiquity and universality of poetry. What does it mean? Antiquity means, he begins by saying that poetry is not something that is recent or something that is modern, but poetry goes as far back as human existence and civilization is. So what is antiquity? What is antique? Something very ancient, something very old. Not old, but something that has been there for quite some time. Similarly, Sydney says poetry existed in all times in human societies. The earliest form of art was the song, was the poetry. And poetry exists in all cultures, in all nations, in all geographies. Am I clear? This is the first point. And he gives examples. Okay? He says that, okay, now it was the first giver of knowledge. It was the first form of knowledge that was available to people. Poetry emerged as a light dispelling the darkness. He says, the first light giver to ignorance, the first nurse whose milk by little and little enabled them to feed afterwards of tougher knowledges. What does it mean? Sidney says that poetry, song, these were the early forms of knowledge. This is how people began to understand life around them, began to understand nature around them. It's like children being nursed, nursed on what? Milk, because they cannot digest other food. Are you able to understand this? Later on, their bodies are able to digest other food. Similarly, poetry introduced the people earliest to understanding, world around them in all societies. So he says we go back to societies before, before Homer and before Hesiod. Now, and will they now play the hedgehog that being received into the den drove his host, or rather the vipers that with their birth kill their parents? Now, this is again a kind of a myth. The hedgehog driving out the host. You all know that the hedgehog has, this brittle, bristles on it, needle-like structures. So the point here is, people who have benefited from poetry, we have all benefited from poetry, and to call poetry names is like killing your parents. He says, he gives an example. Now, first point is poetry is the first form of knowledge. Second, philosophy appeared as poetry. Second point is philosophy appeared as poetry. Even Plato, made use of poetry to convey his philosophy. Now, poetry was a kind of a outer structure, skin, through which philosophy was presented. Now, then even historians, also wrote in the form of poetry. He gives the example of Herodotus, Herodotus. Herodotus is considered to be the father of, history, historiography. Now, he says that even in non-European places, he gives the example of Turkey, Wales, Ireland, India, and then the native Indians in the North American and Southern American continents, where the highest position was given to the poets. He gives the example of the Taino tribe, Taino people, Taino, Taino people, in South America, the southernmost part of South America. They were called Arethos. Arethos was a title given to the poets who were also priests who had access to knowledge. And he gives example. Now, and then at what time does my class get over? Because I never took a class. Just let me see. Class gets over at 12:40. Right? I have some more time. Yeah. Right. Now he says that let us now look at. First is poetry is very antique, very ancient. And then he says, let us now look at our own European antiquity, that is Greek and Roman writers. How did they look at them? First is, the Romans called the poet Vates. 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 Is it given there in your reader? Okay. So the Romans called the poet what? Repeat that. The Romans called their poets. Is somebody there, or have you all left the Vates? Okay, Vates, which means some kind of a prophet, or a diviner, or a foreseer. Somebody who can see into the unknown, can know what is not known, can see into the depth of things. That was the understanding of the Romans vis-a-vis their poets. So they were called, okay, Vatis. Now, who is seen as a foreseer, as a seer, S-E-E-R, seer, a prophet, a seer, as a diviner, D-I-V-I-N-E-R, diviner, as somebody who divines. Divines means what? Somebody who can understand. This was the first reference to the poet. Conjoined words, okay? Vaticinium and vaticinari. So the diviner who is able to see things. Okay? That's why you have, the references to the Delphic oracle, or the oracle at Delphi, or Sibyl, who could see into the future. Now, even in the Hebrew literature, even in the biblical literature also, you find that the poet is able to see the divine things. He gives the examples of David, King David, the psalmist. And he says the Psalms, okay, talk about the divine knowledge. Second, the Greeks referred to the poet. What did they call him? Okay, they called the poet as poiein. Okay, can you repeat after me?
Poiein.
P-O-I-E-I-N. Poiein. Okay. Now, poiein, from which you get the word poesy. Okay. In Italian also the word poesy. Okay. Now, there is a word called poem. Poem comes from poiein, meaning what? Who is a poiein? Poiein means somebody who ability to make things. Okay, so it's a verb in Greek. The verb poiein, okay, means making something. So a poet is somebody who makes. Are you able to understand? These are the two definitions of poetry. The Greeks call a poet poiein, a maker, okay, and then, okay, from which the word poet comes. The word poet means one who makes.
Make something.
Makes something. One who makes. One who gives shape. The Latin word vates means diviner, prophet. So these are the two terms that are used. And both are important in understanding the nature of poetry. Is poetry something that gives us an access to the deeper meanings of life, like Matthias, a diviner, seer, a prophet, or somebody like a poet, somebody who makes poem. Okay? This is something. First is, poetry is very ancient. Poetry as the first form of knowledge. Poetry was used by philosophers and also historians as a form to convey their knowledge. Then he talks about how the Greeks called the poet poet, meaning maker, and the Romans called him Marcus, meaning a prophet or a seer. Both these two meanings join in the idea of a poet. Then he goes on to talk about how nature forms the basis of all art. All forms of knowledge deals with nature. Everything. I'll quickly ask you a question. What does physics deal with? What does physics deal with?
Science.
Science. I said physics. Okay. What does it deal with?
Gravity.
Only gravity.
Energy.
Nature.
It deals with the physical world, right? Physics is about the physical world. Physics deals with the physical world, right? Everything that exists is in nature. That's why Newton's book is called what?
Physics.
What is Newton's famous book?
Law of nature.
What did Newton write?
Law of nature.
Laws.
No, we are talking about Newton's laws.
Newton's
Law of gravitation, sir.
Wait. Let me tell you one thing. Physics deals with nature. Okay? Now, that's why Newton's book is called, okay, Philosophiae Naturalis, okay, Principia Mathematica, meaning the mathematical principles of natural philosophy. Are you able to get the title? Okay? Newton's book is called Principia. It's simply called Principia, meaning the principles of mathematical principles of natural philosophy. The point is, nature means the physical world. Are you able to understand? Chemistry deals with what? The physical world, the world around us. Are you able to understand that? Of course, you synthesize you can synthesize some chemicals, but all, if you look at the periodic table, where do you find them? Magnesium, silver, gold, mercury.
No, that.
Where do you find them?
In nature, sir. We find all those things in nature.
Simple. So, now, Sydney says that every science, every art, every form of human knowledge is tied to nature. Okay? Now, but poets alone are free from nature. Meaning what? They don't deal with things as they really are, but they can invent things which ought to be. The world as it is the domain of all human knowledges, whether it is philosophy, whether it is chemistry or mathematics or astronomy, anything, that is all physical. But poets alone, imaginative writers alone, are free from nature because they can There is nothing that ties them down. He says, her world is brazen, the poets only deliver a golden. The world as it is full of imperfections. The world as we know is not perfect, not ideal, not very pleasant, not may not give us happiness and pleasure. But poetry or art alone gives us a pleasure because it presents an alternative world, a world that doesn't exist anywhere except in the imagination. Okay, I think I'll stop there and I'll, you can read the rest of the essay. Okay, follow these four major points. What are the major points in the essay? First is ancient poetry, that is
Ancient
antiquity of poetry and universality of poetry. It's there in all societies. Second, he
history
talks
and
about,
philosophy.
yeah, history. So it is superior to history and philosophy. Third, talks about various kinds of poetry, meaning this is called, the
Review of
digression
English poetry.
and drama.
Drama view of poetry.
This is digression. So various kinds of poetry, meaning epic, lyric, tragedy, comedy, okay, pastoral, heroic. So then, what are the four major objections to poetry? Then the
Poetry
digression.
is the form of knowledge.
Yeah. Okay. Objections to poetry. Then Sydney's view of poetry. These are the main points in the essay. Yeah, you can, you can read them. Okay, and all the best for your preparation and exams. Okay. Well, see you all.
This is the last class of yours, sir.
Yeah, it is my last class. So yeah, if you, I wish you well in your examinations. You can study the material that is there and also make use of the links that I suggested, the notes that are available to you. Okay, sparknotes.com, cliffnotes.com, okay, and greatsilver.com.
Okay, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you
sir.
so much, sir.
Yeah, bye bye, all of you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Can somebody share the links which he has said just now in the Telegraph group, please?
Clicknotes.com.